unhinged HOA president who will eventually slash your tires and try to spray paint your house. I slept well that night, just like I did every night, secure in the knowledge that my home was truly mine. My driveway, my property, my rules, the way it should be. I was standing in my driveway at 7 in the morning, coffee in hand, admiring what I considered to be a perfectly reasonable pile of snow when Margaret Patterson came storming across the street like a woman on a mission from hell itself. Let me back up a bit. My name is Henry Carson, and I had just moved to the Pinewood Heights subdivision in Boulder, Colorado, about 6 months prior. The neighborhood seemed nice enough at first glance, with its neat rows of 2-story houses, manicured lawns, and those annoying little signs reminding everyone that this was a proud HOA community. I should have taken those signs as the warning they were meant to be, but I was too excited about finally owning my own home to pay attention to the red flags. The HOA president was none other than Margaret Patterson, a 52-year-old woman with the kind of haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager," from 3 blocks away. She had short blonde hair with highlights that were just a shade too bright, wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and always dressed like she was about to attend a business meeting, even when she was just checking her mailbox. Margaret took her position as HOA president with the kind of seriousness usually reserved for heads of state, and she ran the neighborhood with an iron fist wrapped in passive-aggressive notes and violation notices. The snow pile in question had appeared after I spent 2 hours that morning clearing my driveway. We had gotten about 14 inches of snow overnight, which was pretty standard for Boulder in January. I had used my snowblower to clear the driveway, and naturally, I had to put the snow somewhere. So I did what any reasonable person would do and piled it at the end of my driveway, right where my property met the curb. The pile was maybe 4 feet high and 6 feet wide, nothing crazy, nothing blocking anything important. "Excuse me, Henry," Margaret called out as she approached, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness that people use when they are about to ruin your day. "We need to talk about that monstrosity you have created." I took a sip of my coffee and turned to face her. "Good morning, Margaret." "You mean the snow pile?" "Yes, the snow pile," she said, making air quotes with her fingers. "That enormous eyesore that is violating at least 3 different HOA regulations." I looked at the pile again, then back at her. "It's just snow, Margaret, from my driveway. Where else am I supposed to put it?" She pulled out a small notebook from her designer handbag and flipped through it with practiced efficiency. According to Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the HOA bylaws, any snow removal must be conducted in a manner that does not create visual pollution or obstruct neighborhood aesthetics. Your pile is clearly visible from the street and is therefore in violation. Visual pollution. I could not believe what I was hearing. "It's snow. It will melt in a few days." "That is not the point," Margaret said, her voice getting sharper. "The rules exist for a reason, Henry. If we let everyone just pile snow wherever they want, this neighborhood would look like a disaster zone. You need to remove it immediately." I felt my jaw clench. This was not the first time Margaret had found something to complain about. In the 6 months I had lived here, she had already cited me for leaving my garbage cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours after pickup, for having a garden hose that was the wrong shade of green, and for parking my truck in my own driveway at an angle she deemed inappropriate. I was getting really tired of her constant harassment. "Margaret, I am not removing the snow. It is on my property, it is not blocking anything, and it is going to melt on its own. This is ridiculous." Her face turned red. "This is not ridiculous, this is the law." Our HOA bylaws are legally binding documents, Henry. If you refuse to comply, I will have no choice but to issue you a formal violation notice and a fine. You do what you need to do, I said, turning back toward my house. I've got more important things to worry about than your made-up snow emergencies. I could hear her sputtering behind me as I walked away, but I did not turn around. I went inside, finished my coffee, and tried to forget about the whole interaction. I had a full day of work ahead of me since I worked from home as a software developer, and I did not want to let Margaret ruin my mood. About an hour later, I was deep into coding when I heard sirens outside. At first, I figured they were just passing through the neighborhood, heading to some actual emergency somewhere else. But then the sirens stopped, and they sounded really close. I got up and looked out my front window, and my stomach dropped. There were 2 police cars parked in front of my house, their lights still flashing. 2 officers were standing on my front lawn, and Margaret was with them, gesturing wildly at my snow pile and clearly giving them an earful about something. I could not believe it. She had actually called the cops. On a snow pile, I threw on my shoes and headed outside, my heart pounding. This was insane. As I approached, I could hear Margaret's voice rising above the others, and he absolutely refused to remove it when I asked him politely. He was extremely rude and dismissive. This is a clear violation of our community standards, and I need you to make him understand that he cannot just ignore the rules. One of the officers, a young guy who looked like he was maybe 25, was scribbling in a notebook and nodding along. The other officer, an older woman with gray hair and tired eyes, was staring at the snow pile with an expression that suggested she was questioning all of her life choices. "Excuse me, officers," I said as I walked up. "I am Henry Carson. This is my house. Can someone please tell me what is going on?" The older officer turned to me, and I could see her name tag read Officer Linda Martinez. She looked at me, then at Margaret, then at the snow pile, and let out a long sigh. "Mr. Carson, we received a 911 call about a public safety hazard at this address. The caller indicated that there was a dangerous obstruction that required immediate police intervention." I stared at Margaret in disbelief. She called 911 over a snow pile. "It is not just a snow pile," Margaret interjected. "It is a hazard. What if a child runs into it? What if it blocks someone's view and causes an accident? This is a serious safety concern." Officer Martinez held up her hand. "Madam, please let me handle this." She turned back to me. "Mr. Carson, is this the hazard in question?" She pointed at the snow pile. "If by hazard you mean a completely normal pile of snow that I made while clearing my driveway this morning, then yes." The younger officer, whose name tag identified him as Officer James Chen, walked over to examine the snow pile more closely. He walked around it, looked at it from different angles, and even kicked it lightly with his boot. Then he came back and conferred quietly with Officer Martinez. Officer Martinez turned to Margaret. "Madam, can you explain to me exactly what emergency situation you were reporting when you called 911? "I just told you," Margaret said, her voice getting higher. "This snow pile is a violation of our HOA regulations and a potential safety hazard. I needed police assistance to ensure compliance. Madam, did you witness an actual emergency? Was someone injured? Was there an immediate threat to life or property?" "Well, no, but there could be. That is the point of prevention." Officer Martinez pulled out her own notebook. "Madam, what is your name?" "Margaret Patterson. I am the president of the Pinewood Heights Homeowners Association, and I have every right to call the police when residents violate the rules." "Mrs. Patterson, 911 is for emergencies only. Actual emergencies." medical emergencies, crimes in progress, immediate threats to safety. HOA disputes are not emergencies. Margaret's face was turning an impressive shade of purple. Are you telling me you are not going to do anything about this? About the snow pile? No, madam. There is no violation of any city ordinance here. The snow is on private property. It is not blocking the sidewalk or the street, and it poses no danger to anyone. This is a civil matter between you and Mr. Carson and possibly your HOA, but it is not a police matter and it is definitely not an emergency. This is unacceptable, Margaret practically shouted. I demand that you make him remove it right now. Officer Martinez's expression hardened. Madam, I am going to need you to calm down. You have wasted valuable emergency resources by calling 911 for a non-emergency situation. While my partner and I have been here dealing with a snow pile, there could have been actual emergencies that needed our attention. I have not wasted anything. I have every right to, Mrs. Patterson, Officer Martinez interrupted, her voice firm. You do not have the right to abuse the 911 system. What you have done is actually a violation of Colorado Revised Statutes Section 18-9-111, which makes it illegal to make false reports to authorities or to misuse emergency services. Margaret's mouth opened and closed like a fish. I did not make a false report. You reported an emergency that did not exist. You called 911, which is specifically designated for life-threatening emergencies and crimes in progress, to complain about a pile of snow. That is misuse of emergency services. I stood there watching this unfold, hardly able to believe what I was hearing. Officer Chen was now writing something in his own notebook, occasionally glancing at Margaret with an expression that might have been sympathy or might have been second-hand embarrassment. I am going to issue you a citation, Officer Martinez continued, pulling out a pad of tickets from her belt. The fine for misusing emergency services is $300. You are lucky I am not taking you into custody, which I would be within my rights to do. You cannot be serious, Margaret said, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. I am trying to maintain the standards of this neighborhood. I am trying to do my job. Your job does not include calling 911 for HOA disputes, Officer Martinez said as she filled out the ticket. If you have an issue with a neighbor violating HOA rules, you handle it through your HOA procedures. You send letters, you hold meetings, you levy fines through your organization. What you do not do is call emergency services and take police officers away from actual emergencies. She tore the ticket from the pad and handed it to Margaret, who took it with shaking hands. Her face had gone from purple to pale, and I could see the reality of the situation finally sinking in. If you contest this ticket, you will have the opportunity to appear before a judge, Officer Martinez said. But I should warn you that we take misuse of 911 very seriously, especially in a city like Boulder where our emergency services are already stretched thin. The judge is not going to be sympathetic. Margaret looked at the ticket, then at me, then back at Officer Martinez. For a moment, I thought she might start crying, but instead, she just turned on her heel and walked back across the street to her house without another word. Officer Martinez turned to me. Mr. Carson, I apologize for the inconvenience. For what it is worth, your snow pile looks perfectly fine to me. Just make sure it does not block any public walkways or streets, but from what I can see, you are well within your rights here. Thank you, officer. I appreciate you being reasonable about this. Just doing my job, she said. And part of my job is making sure people understand that 911 is not a personal complaint hotline. She handed me a card. If Mrs. Patterson continues to harass you about this or anything else, and you feel it crosses the line into actual harassment, give us a call on the non-emergency line. Not 911, she added with a slight smile. Officer Chen nodded at me. Have a good day, sir. Nice snow pile, by the way. Very neat. I watched as they got back into their patrol cars and drove away, lights off this time. I stood in my driveway for a moment, just processing what had just happened. Margaret Patterson, the all-powerful HOA president, had just been fined by the police for trying to use them as her personal enforcement squad. I would be lying if I said I did not feel a certain sense of satisfaction. I went back inside and tried to get back to work, but I could not focus. I kept replaying the scene in my head, especially the look on Margaret's face when Officer Martinez handed her that ticket. I knew this was not over. Margaret was not the type of person to just accept defeat and move on. She was going to retaliate somehow, and I needed to be prepared. Sure enough, 3 days later, I found a formal violation notice in my mailbox. It was printed on official HOA letterhead and was signed by Margaret herself. The notice informed me that I was in violation of multiple HOA bylaws and that I had been fined $500. The violations listed included the snow pile, which had mostly melted by then, as well as a bunch of other things I had supposedly done wrong. According to the notice, my front door wreath was not an approved holiday decoration. My mailbox was 2 inches too far to the left, and my lawn had not been properly maintained to HOA standards. The last one was particularly absurd since my lawn was currently covered in snow and had been for weeks. How exactly was I supposed to maintain it to any standard in the middle of winter? I knew what this was. This was Margaret's revenge for the police incident. She could not use the cops to bully me anymore, so she was going to use the HOA bylaws instead. And the thing was, she technically had the power to do it. HOAs in Colorado had a lot of authority, and if you did not pay their fines, they could put liens on your house or even force you to sell. But I was not going to just roll over and let her win. I sat down at my computer and started researching Colorado HOA laws. I spent hours reading through statutes and case law, taking notes and building my case. What I found was actually pretty interesting. While HOAs did have a lot of power, they also had to follow certain rules. They could not fine people arbitrarily or selectively enforce bylaws. They had to give proper notice, they had to follow their own procedures, and they had to act in good faith. Margaret's violation notice was dated the same day as the police incident, which meant she had written it up immediately after getting her ticket. That showed that the violations were retaliatory, not based on any actual concern for neighborhood standards. Plus, several of the violations she listed were not even in the official HOA bylaws. I had read through the entire document when I bought my house, and there was nothing in there about wreaths or mailbox positioning. I drafted a response letter, citing the specific laws and bylaws that Margaret was violating. I pointed out that her actions appeared to be retaliatory, and that the fines were not justified under the HOA's own rules. I stated that I would not be paying the fines, and that if the HOA attempted to pursue any legal action, I would countersue for harassment. I printed the letter, signed it, and hand-delivered it to Margaret's mailbox that evening. Then I waited. The response came faster than I expected. The next morning, my phone rang at 8 a.m. I did not recognize the number, but I answered anyway. "Henry Carson," a woman's voice asked, speaking. "This is Deborah Mitchell. I am the vice president of the Pinewood Heights HOA. I am calling about the incident with Margaret Patterson and the violation notice you received." I sat up straighter. "Okay. I want to apologize on behalf of the HOA. Several board members, myself included, were not aware of what happened last week until we saw your response letter. Margaret forwarded it to the entire board, and frankly, we are very concerned about how she has been handling this situation. This was unexpected. I appreciate that, Miss Mitchell. Please call me Deborah. Look, Henry, I am going to be straight with you. Margaret has been getting more and more difficult to work with over the past year. This is not the first time she has gone overboard with enforcement, but it is definitely the worst. We had an emergency board meeting last night, and we have decided to void all of the violations she issued to you. The fines are canceled, and we are going to be having a serious conversation with Margaret about her conduct. That is good to hear, I said, genuinely relieved. I was prepared to fight this, but I am glad it will not come to that. We are also going to be reviewing all of her recent actions to make sure there are not other residents she has been targeting inappropriately. I have to ask, though, what exactly happened with the police? Margaret's version of events is very different from what your letter described. I explained the whole thing, from the initial confrontation about the snow pile to Margaret calling 911 to the officers issuing her a citation. Deborah listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she let out a long breath. "That is even worse than I thought," she said. "Henry, I am so sorry you had to deal with that. That is absolutely not how our HOA is supposed to operate. We are supposed to be making the neighborhood better, not making our residents' lives miserable." "I appreciate that, Deborah. Honestly, I was starting to regret moving here." "Please do not give up on us yet. We are going to make some changes. In fact, I would not be surprised if Margaret steps down from her position after we have our conversation with her. And if she does not step down voluntarily, we may have to remove her." We talked for a few more minutes, and Deborah gave me her personal cell phone number in case I had any other issues. After we hung up, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Maybe this neighborhood would not be so bad after all. 2 weeks later, there was a notice in everyone's mailbox about a special HOA meeting. The agenda included leadership transition and bylaw enforcement reform, which I figured was code for dealing with the Margaret situation. The meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday at the community center. I almost did not go. I had never been to an HOA meeting before, and I was not particularly interested in getting more involved in neighborhood politics. But curiosity got the better of me, and I figured I should at least see how this played out. The community center was packed when I arrived. Apparently, I was not the only one who was curious. I recognized several of my neighbors, including the retired couple who lived next door to me, the young family 3 houses down, and the single mom across the street. Everyone was chatting in small groups, and the energy in the room was tense but excited. Margaret was sitting at the front table with the rest of the board members, and she looked miserable. Her usual perfectly styled hair was slightly disheveled, and she was not making eye contact with anyone. Deborah Mitchell sat next to her, along with 3 other board members I did not know. Deborah called the meeting to order at exactly 7 p.m. "Thank you all for coming. I know this is an unusual meeting, but we have some important matters to discuss. First, I want to address some concerns that have been raised about how our HOA has been operating, specifically regarding enforcement of our bylaws." She went on to explain, in carefully diplomatic language, that there had been issues with inconsistent and sometimes inappropriate enforcement actions. She did not name Margaret specifically, but everyone in the room knew exactly who she was talking about. "As a result of these concerns," Deborah continued, "the board has voted to implement several reforms. First, all violation notices must be approved by at least 3 board members before they can be issued. Second, We are establishing an appeals process for any resident who believes they have been unfairly cited. And third, we are going to be conducting a comprehensive review of our bylaws to remove outdated or overly restrictive rules. There was a murmur of approval from the crowd. I saw several people nodding and whispering to their neighbors. Additionally, Deborah said, and her voice got a bit more serious, Margaret Patterson has submitted her resignation as HOA president, effective immediately. The room erupted. Some people applauded, others gasped, and a few people tried to object. Margaret sat there with her head down, her face bright red. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Deborah raised her hand for quiet. Margaret has served this community for 5 years, and while we appreciate her dedication, we all agree that it is time for new leadership. The board has voted to appoint me as interim president until we can hold proper elections next month. If anyone is interested in running for the position, please see me after the meeting. The rest of the meeting was mostly procedural stuff, but there was one more interesting development. A man I did not know stood up during the public comment period and said, "I want to thank whoever finally stood up to Margaret. She has been terrorizing this neighborhood for years, and I am glad someone finally called her out." Several other people chimed in with their own stories. Apparently, Margaret had been harassing people about all sorts of things. One woman said Margaret had tried to fine her for having the wrong color flowers in her garden. Another man said Margaret had called code enforcement on him for having a ladder visible in his garage with the door open. The stories went on, and I realized that I had actually gotten off easy. After the meeting, several people came up to me and thanked me. Word had spread about what happened with the police, and apparently, I was being seen as some kind of hero for standing up to Margaret. I tried to downplay it, saying I had just been defending my right to pile snow on my own property, but people seemed genuinely grateful. As I was leaving, Deborah caught up with me. "Henry, thank you for forcing us to deal with this. I know it probably was not fun for you, but you did this neighborhood a favor." "I was just trying to clear my driveway," I said. She laughed. "Well, your snow pile might have been the best thing to happen to Pinewood Heights in years." I went home that night feeling better about my neighborhood than I had since I moved in. The snow pile that had started all of this had long since melted, but the effects of that one morning confrontation were still rippling through the community. But of course, it was not quite over yet. 3 days after the HOA meeting, I was out getting my mail when a car pulled up in front of my house. Margaret got out, and my stomach tightened. I had not spoken to her since the police incident, and I was not particularly interested in starting now. "Henry," she called out, walking up my driveway. "Can we talk?" I considered going inside and ignoring her, but something in her voice made me pause. She sounded different, not angry or entitled, just tired. "What do you want, Margaret?" She stopped a few feet away from me, clutching her purse like it was a lifeline. "I want to apologize. That caught me off guard." "Okay." I have been doing a lot of thinking since everything happened, the police, the board, the meeting, and I have realized that I was wrong. Not just about the snow pile, but about a lot of things. I let being HOA president go to my head. I started thinking that enforcing the rules was more important than being a good neighbor, and I made a lot of people unhappy, including you. I did not know what to say. This was not what I had expected. "I know an apology does not fix anything," she continued. "And I do not expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I am sorry. I was out of line and I should never have called 911. That was stupid and wasteful, and I deserved that ticket." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. She looked down. "Because you are the one who finally stood up to me. Everyone else just went along with whatever I said, or they complained behind my back but never to my face. You were the first person to actually tell me no and mean it." And even though I hated it at the time, you were right. We stood there in awkward silence for a moment. I still was not sure how I felt about all this. Part of me was still angry about how she had treated me, but another part of me felt bad seeing her like this. She looked genuinely remorseful. I appreciate the apology, Margaret, I really do. And for what it is worth, I think you probably did care about the neighborhood. You just went about it the wrong way. She nodded. I did care. I still do. But I am realizing that rules and regulations are not the same thing as community. A neighborhood is about people, not perfect lawns and matching mailboxes. That is a good realization to have. My husband told me I was becoming unbearable, she said with a sad smile. I did not believe him until the police gave me that ticket. That was a real wake-up call. Are you going to be okay? I asked, surprising myself with the question. I think so. I am going to take a break from HOA stuff and focus on other things. Maybe volunteer at the library or something where I can be helpful without being a tyrant. I actually smiled at that. That sounds like a good plan. Anyway, I should let you go. Thank you for listening, Henry, and again, I am sorry. She walked back to her car and I watched her drive away. I went inside feeling strangely lighter. I had not realized how much negative energy I had been carrying around about the whole situation until that apology released it. Over the next few weeks, life in Pinewood Heights actually improved. Deborah turned out to be a much more reasonable HOA president than Margaret had been. She focused on actual issues like organizing neighborhood cleanups and negotiating better snow removal contracts, rather than harassing people about minor violations. The board followed through on their promise to reform the bylaws, and they eliminated a bunch of the more ridiculous rules. I started getting to know my neighbors better. The retired couple next door, Tom and Linda, invited me over for dinner one night. The young family down the street, the Johnsons, asked if I wanted to join their informal poker night. Even the single mom across the street, whose name was Rachel, started waving and chatting when we ran into each other. One Saturday in late February, I was outside washing my truck when Tom came over. Hey Henry, Linda and I were thinking of putting together a neighborhood barbecue when the weather gets warmer. Would you be interested in helping organize it? Sure, I said. That sounds like fun. Great. We were thinking maybe late April or early May. Nothing too fancy. Just a way for everyone to get together and actually enjoy living here instead of worrying about HOA violations. I laughed. I am definitely on board with that. As Tom walked back to his house, I looked around the neighborhood. The snow was starting to melt for good now, revealing the brown grass and bare trees underneath. In a few weeks, everything would start turning green again. Spring was coming, and with it, a fresh start for Pinewood Heights. The whole experience had taught me something important. Sometimes standing up for yourself, even over something as silly as a snow pile, can have bigger consequences than you expect. If I had just backed down and removed the snow like Margaret demanded, she would have continued her reign of terror over the neighborhood. But by refusing to be bullied, and by letting the situation play out naturally, change had happened. I finished washing my truck and went inside to warm up. My phone buzzed with a text from Deborah. It was a reminder about the HOA elections next week and an encouragement to vote. The message ended with, "Thanks for being part of our community, Henry. We are glad you are here." I smiled and put my phone down. Yeah, I was glad I was here too. The elections happened the following Tuesday at another community meeting. This time the atmosphere was completely different from the last meeting. People were friendly and relaxed, joking with each other and actually seeming to enjoy themselves. Deborah was running for president, and there was one other candidate, a guy named Robert Chen who lived 2 streets over. Both of them gave short speeches about their vision for the HOA, and both emphasized being reasonable and focusing on things that actually mattered. Deborah won by a comfortable margin, which did not surprise anyone. She had proven herself to be fair and level-headed over the past month. Robert was elected vice president, and they appointed 3 other residents to fill out the rest of the board. Margaret was not at the meeting, and nobody mentioned her name. As I was leaving, Rachel, the single mom from across the street, caught up with me. "Hey, Henry, can I talk to you for a second?" "Sure, what is up?" "I just wanted to say thank you. I know everyone has probably been saying that, but I mean it. Margaret gave me so much grief when I first moved here 2 years ago. She tried to find me because my kid left a bike in the front yard overnight. She complained about my car being too old and ugly for the neighborhood. She even suggested that I should move somewhere else because single mothers did not fit the family image she wanted for Pinewood Heights." I felt a flash of anger. She said that. Oh yeah, she was awful. But I could not afford to fight with the HOA, and I definitely could not afford to move again. So I just tried to stay under her radar and follow every single rule, no matter how stupid. It was exhausting. But you stood up to her and everything changed. My life is so much better now. I actually enjoy living here. I am glad things improved, Rachel. For what it is worth, I think you and your kid are great additions to the neighborhood. She smiled. Thanks, Henry. That means a lot. Hey, my son is selling candy bars for a school fundraiser. Any chance you want to buy some? I ended up buying 5 candy bars, which was probably more than I needed, but Rachel seemed so happy that I did not mind. As I walked home with my arms full of chocolate, I thought about how much had changed in just a few weeks. The neighborhood felt like an actual community now, not just a collection of houses ruled by an iron-fisted HOA president. March rolled around, and with it came the start of spring. The snow finally melted completely, revealing everyone's lawns in various states of disrepair from the winter. Under Margaret's regime, this would have resulted in a flurry of violation notices about lawn maintenance. But Deborah sent out a friendly email instead, reminding everyone that it was a good time to start spring yard work and offering to organize a neighborhood bulk order of mulch and fertilizer to get everyone a discount. It was such a small thing, but it made all the difference. Instead of being threatened and bullied, people were being treated like adults who could take care of their own properties. And surprisingly, the neighborhood actually looked better. When people were not being constantly nagged and threatened, they took more pride in their homes. I spent a Saturday in mid-March working on my own yard, raking up dead leaves and trimming back some bushes. Tom and Linda were doing the same next door, and we ended up working together to clean up the area where our properties met. It was actually kind of nice, working outside in the warming weather and chatting with neighbors. You know, Tom said as we loaded branches into his yard waste bin, this neighborhood is finally starting to feel like the place we thought we were moving to when we bought our house. How long have you lived here? I asked. 8 years. And for most of that time, Margaret has been making everyone miserable. Linda and I actually talked about moving last year, but we love our house and we did not want to go through the hassle. We just kept hoping things would change. I had no idea it had been that bad for that long. Oh yeah, you just happened to be the person who was here when the situation finally came to a head, but it could have been any of us. We were all fed up. Linda came out with lemonade for everyone, and we took a break to sit on their porch. Several other neighbors were out working on their yards too, and people kept walking by and stopping to chat. It felt like a real neighborhood for the first time since I had moved in. So Henry, Linda said, Tom tells me you are helping organize the spring barbecue. That is the plan. Have you thought about when we should do it? How about the last weekend in April? That should give everyone enough time to get their yards in shape, and the weather should be nice by then. We spent the next hour planning out details. We would set up in the community center parking lot. Everyone would bring a dish to share, and we would hire a local band to play music. Tom volunteered to handle getting the necessary permits from the city, and Linda said she would organize a sign-up sheet for food. As I walked back to my house later that afternoon, I felt genuinely happy. This was what I had imagined when I bought a house in an HOA neighborhood. Not constant harassment over minor violations, but actual community and neighborliness. The next few weeks flew by. Work kept me busy during the week, and on weekends, I found myself spending more and more time hanging out with neighbors. The poker night with the Johnsons became a regular thing. Tom and Linda had me over for dinner twice more. Rachel's son started a lawn mowing business, and I hired him to mow my lawn once a week once the grass started growing. I did see Margaret once during this time. I was at the grocery store and I spotted her in the produce section. She saw me too, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. Then she gave me a small nod and a tentative smile, and I nodded back. She looked better than she had the last time I saw her, less stressed and tired. I hoped she was finding whatever it was she needed to be happy. The spring barbecue happened on the last Saturday in April, and it was a huge success. Nearly every house in the neighborhood was represented, and the community center parking lot was full of people eating, talking, and laughing. The band was pretty good, playing a mix of classic rock and country music that had people dancing. Kids were running around playing games, and several people had brought their dogs. Deborah stood up on a small stage and made a short speech thanking everyone for coming and celebrating the new spirit of community in Pinewood Heights. She did not mention Margaret or the snow pile incident, but I knew everyone was thinking about it. "This is what an HOA should be about," Deborah said. "Bringing people together, making our neighborhood a better place to live and supporting each other. Not getting bogged down in petty rules and violations. So let us keep this energy going. Let us keep being good neighbors to each other." Everyone applauded, and the party continued. I found myself talking to people I had never met before, even though we had been living in the same neighborhood for months. It turned out the guy 4 houses down from me was also a software developer, and we made plans to get coffee and talk shop. The woman across the street from him was a marathon runner, and she invited me to join a local running group. As the sun started to set and the party began to wind down, Tom came over and put his hand on my shoulder. "You know, Henry, none of this would have happened without you." "I just refused to move a snow pile," I said. "No, you did more than that. You stood up for what was right when nobody else would. You showed us that we did not have to just accept the way things were. That is a big deal." I did not know what to say to that, so I just smiled and thanked him. The party ended around 9 p.m., and a group of us stayed behind to clean up. It was mostly picking up trash and folding tables. Easy work made easier by having a dozen people helping. By 10 p.m., the parking lot looked as good as new, and everyone headed home. I walked back to my house under the stars, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood settling in for the night. Dogs barking in the distance, the hum of traffic from the main road a few blocks away, someone's television playing through an open window. Normal sounds, peaceful sounds. Over the following months, life in Pinewood Heights continued to improve. The HOA started focusing on actual improvements rather than enforcement. They organized a neighborhood watch program, negotiated a contract with a landscaping company to maintain the common areas, and even got a grant from the city to install new playground equipment at the community center. I became more involved in the community. I joined the HOA board as the treasurer, helping Deborah manage the neighborhood finances. It was not something I had ever planned to do, but she asked, and I figured I owed it to the neighborhood after everything that had happened. One evening in June, I was at a board meeting when Deborah brought up an interesting point. We have been getting questions from potential home buyers about our HOA. Apparently, word has spread about our reforms, and people specifically want to move here because we have a reputation for being reasonable. That is great, Robert said. Although it is kind of sad that being reasonable is now considered a selling point for an HOA. We all laughed, but he was right. The bar for HOAs was apparently pretty low. I have been thinking, Deborah continued, what if we put together a guide for other HOAs, like a best practices document based on what we have learned? Maybe we could help other neighborhoods avoid the problems we had. It was a good idea, and we all agreed to work on it. Over the next few weeks, we compiled a document outlining our approach to HOA governance. The key principles were simple. Treat residents like adults, focus on things that actually matter, communicate clearly and respectfully, and remember that rules exist to serve the community, not the other way around. We posted the guide on the neighborhood website and sent it to a few local news outlets. To our surprise, it got picked up by a Denver newspaper and then by a statewide HOA association. Suddenly, Deborah was getting calls from other HOA boards asking for advice. The little neighborhood dispute over a snow pile had somehow turned into a minor movement for HOA reform. I found the whole thing amusing. All I had wanted to do was clear my driveway and drink my coffee in peace. But that one act of standing up to Margaret had set off a chain reaction that was still continuing months later. In August, the city of Boulder invited Deborah to speak at a town hall meeting about HOA governance. She asked if I wanted to come with her, and I agreed. The meeting was held at the municipal building, and there were probably 200 people there, most of them either HOA board members or residents dealing with HOA issues. Deborah told the story of what had happened in Pinewood Heights, starting with my snow pile and Margaret's 911 call, and ending with the reforms we had implemented. People laughed at the absurdity of calling the police over snow, but they also nodded in recognition. Apparently, overzealous HOA enforcement was a common problem. After her presentation, there was a queue and a session. One woman stood up and said, "This all sounds great, but what if your HOA president refuses to change? What if they just keep being unreasonable?" Deborah looked at me, and I realized she wanted me to answer. I stood up. In our case, the president ended up resigning, but if that had not happened, the board had already voted to remove her. Most HOA bylaws have provisions for removing board members if they are not fulfilling their duties appropriately. It takes courage to stand up to someone in power, but sometimes it is necessary. And if your HOA board is not responsive, you can always vote them out in the next election. Another person asked, "But what about in the meantime? What if you are being harassed by your HOA and you cannot afford the fines?" "Document everything," I said. "Keep records of every interaction, every fine, every violation notice. If the HOA is acting inappropriately, you may have grounds to challenge their actions legally. And do not be afraid to push back. A lot of HOA power comes from people being too intimidated to question them. But they are not above the law, and they do not have unlimited authority." The questions continued for another hour, and by the end of the meeting, several people came up to thank us for speaking. A few even asked if they could use our best practices guide for their own neighborhoods. We said yes, of course, and encouraged them to adapt it to their own needs. On the drive home, Deborah said, You know, when I woke up that morning in January and heard that Margaret had called the cops on you, I thought it was going to be just another HOA drama. I never imagined it would turn into all of this. Me neither, I said. I really just wanted to clear my driveway. We both laughed. Fall came, and with it, cooler weather and changing leaves. The neighborhood organized another barbecue in October, and it was even better attended than the spring one. People were starting to think of Pinewood Heights as a community rather than just a place where they lived, and that made all the difference. I was raking leaves one Saturday afternoon in November when a car pulled into my driveway. I did not recognize the vehicle, but when the driver got out, I realized it was Margaret. I had not seen her since that brief encounter at the grocery store months ago. "Hi, Henry," she said, walking over. She looked good, healthier, and more relaxed than I had ever seen her. "Hi, Margaret. How are you doing?" "Really well, actually. I wanted to stop by and tell you something. I have been volunteering at the library like I mentioned, and I absolutely love it. I am helping with their literacy program, working with kids who are learning to read. It is so rewarding, and nobody is worried about whether the books are arranged at the perfect angle or if someone's library card is the wrong color." I smiled. "That sounds perfect for you. It really is. And I have been doing some therapy too, working through why I got so obsessed with controlling everything in the neighborhood. Turns out I had some issues I needed to deal with." "Good for you, Margaret. Seriously. I also wanted to tell you that I have been following what you and Deborah have been doing with the HOA reform stuff. I think it is amazing. You are helping a lot of people. We are just trying to make things better. Well, you are succeeding. And Henry, I know I already apologized once, but I want to say it again. I am truly sorry for how I treated you and everyone else in the neighborhood. I was so focused on rules and control that I forgot about basic human decency. I appreciate that, Margaret, and I am glad you are doing better." She smiled, and it looked genuine. "Thank you. I should let you get back to your leaves, but I wanted you to know that what happened that day, as awful as it was at the time, ended up being the best thing that could have happened to me. It forced me to take a hard look at myself and make some changes. So, thank you." She got back in her car and drove away, and I stood there for a moment just thinking. People really could change. Margaret had gone from being the neighborhood terror to someone who seemed genuinely happy and at peace with herself. It was a good reminder that even in the worst conflicts, there was potential for growth and redemption. I finished raking my leaves and went inside to warm up. My phone had several messages from the neighborhood group chat. People were planning a holiday party for December, and everyone was excited about it. Tom was organizing a secret Santa exchange. Linda was coordinating a neighborhood light display competition, but emphasizing that it was just for fun and nobody would actually be judged or scored. I smiled at that last part. The old HOA would have had strict rules about holiday decorations. The new HOA was just encouraging people to have fun and celebrate however they wanted. December arrived with the first real snowfall of the season. I woke up one morning to find about 6 inches of fresh snow covering everything. I grabbed my coffee, bundled up in my coat, and headed outside with my snowblower. As I cleared my driveway, I carefully piled the snow at the end, right where my property met the curb. The pile grew to about 4 feet high, just like it had that morning almost a year ago. I stood there looking at it, coffee in hand, and smiled. This snow pile had changed my life in ways I never could have imagined. It had led to confrontation, police involvement, HOA reforms, new friendships, and even helped other neighborhoods deal with their own HOA issues. All because I had refused to be bullied into moving snow off my own property. Tom came out to clear his own driveway and waved at me. Nice snow pile, Henry. Thanks, Tom. I am pretty proud of it. Think anyone will call the cops on you? I doubt it. But if they do, at least we know how that will turn out. We both laughed. The holiday party happened 2 weeks before Christmas, and the entire neighborhood showed up. The community center was decorated with lights and garlands, and there was enough food to feed an army. Kids were running around playing games. Adults were chatting and laughing, and everyone seemed genuinely happy to be there. Deborah stood up to make her usual speech, thanking everyone for another great year. When I look around this room, I see what a community is supposed to be. Neighbors who care about each other, who support each other, and who actually enjoy living near each other. This time last year, things were very different, but thanks to one person's willingness to stand up for what was right, everything changed. She looked at me, and everyone started applauding. I felt my face get hot, and I tried to wave it off, but people kept clapping. Henry Carson refused to be bullied over a snow pile, Deborah continued. And that simple act of standing his ground led to all the positive changes we have experienced this year. So, Henry, on behalf of everyone in Pinewood Heights, thank you. More applause, and several people came over to shake my hand or pat me on the back. I was not great with this kind of attention, but I appreciated the sentiment. The party went late into the night, and by the time I walked home, it was almost midnight. The neighborhood was quiet, covered in a fresh blanket of snow that sparkled under the streetlights. Christmas lights decorated most of the houses, each one different and reflecting the personality of the people who lived there. No more HOA mandates about approved decoration colors or maximum wattage. Just people expressing themselves and celebrating the season however they wanted. I went to bed that night feeling grateful. Grateful for my house, for my neighborhood, for my new friends, and for the unexpected journey that had started with a simple snow pile. It had been a wild year, full of conflict and change, but it had all worked out in the end. The next morning, I woke up to find another violation notice in my mailbox. My heart sank for a moment before I opened it and realized it was a joke. The notice, printed on fake official letterhead, cited me for creating an excessively attractive snow pile that is causing neighborhood envy and setting unreasonably high standards for driveway clearing. It was signed by Tom, Linda, Rachel, and about 15 other neighbors. I laughed out loud, standing there in my driveway in my pajamas and boots. This was my neighborhood now. These were my people. And it had all started because I refused to let an HOA president bully me over a pile of snow. As spring approached again, marking a full year since the original incident, the neighborhood was planning another barbecue. I was helping organize it again, along with Tom and Linda and several others. We were expecting an even bigger turnout than last year. One evening in March, I was at a planning meeting when someone brought up the idea of having a special dedication ceremony at the barbecue. What would we be dedicating? I asked. A plaque, Tom said with a grin. At the end of your driveway. Commemorating the spot where the Great Snow Pile Incident of 2025 occurred. Everyone laughed, but then people started actually discussing it seriously. We could really do that, Linda said. Make it funny but also meaningful. Something about standing up for what is right and how small acts of courage can lead to big changes. I protested, saying it was ridiculous and over the top, but I was outvoted. The plaque was commissioned, and it was set to be unveiled at the spring barbecue. The barbecue happened on the last weekend of April, just like the previous year. The weather was perfect, sunny and warm with just enough breeze to keep things comfortable. The entire neighborhood showed up, along with some people from surrounding neighborhoods who had heard about our HOA reforms and wanted to see what we were all about. There were speeches and music and food, just like the year before. But this time, there was also the plaque unveiling. Deborah made a short speech about the importance of standing up to unreasonable authority and how one person's courage could inspire a whole community. Then she pulled the cover off the plaque, which was mounted on a decorative stone at the end of my driveway. The plaque read, "On this spot in January 2025, Henry Carson made a snow pile. In standing up for his right to clear his own driveway, he sparked a movement for reasonable HOA governance that improved life for everyone in Pinewood Heights." Let this marker remind us that sometimes the smallest acts of resistance against unreasonable authority can lead to the biggest changes. Everyone applauded, and I did not know whether to laugh or cry. It was ridiculous and touching and completely unexpected. Tom came over and shook my hand. "You deserve it, buddy. You really did change everything." The party continued for hours, and people kept coming by to look at the plaque and take pictures with it. It became a running joke that my driveway was now a historical landmark. Someone even suggested that the city should make it an official landmark, which I really hoped was not serious. As the sun set and the party wound down, I found myself standing at the end of my driveway, looking at the plaque. It was surreal to think that a year ago, I had been standing in almost this exact spot, drinking coffee and looking at a pile of snow, completely unaware that my life was about to change. That Margaret Patterson was about to storm across the street and set off a chain of events that would reshape the entire neighborhood. Deborah came over and stood next to me. "So how does it feel to be a local legend?" "Weird," I admitted. I still cannot believe all of this happened because of snow. It was not really about the snow, though, was it? It was about someone finally saying enough is enough. It was about refusing to be pushed around. The snow was just the catalyst. She was right, of course. If it had not been the snow pile, it would have been something else eventually. Margaret had been on a collision course with someone in the neighborhood, and I just happened to be the person she collided with. "You know what the best part is?" Deborah said. "We have had inquiries from 7 other neighborhoods about adopting our HOA model. 7. That means dozens or maybe even hundreds of people are going to have better lives because you refuse to move your snow pile." That put things in perspective. This had not just been about me or even about Pinewood Heights. It had become something bigger, a small example of how standing up to petty authority could inspire others to do the same. "Thank you for backing me up," I said to Deborah. "When you called me after I sent that response letter to Margaret, you could have just sided with her. You were on the board, it would have been easier." "Easier, but wrong," Deborah said. "I had been wanting to do something about Margaret for months, but I did not have the courage." "You gave me that courage. You showed me that it was possible to fight back and win." We stood there for a while longer, watching the last few people clean up from the party. The neighborhood looked beautiful in the fading light, houses lit up from within, people walking around and chatting, kids playing in yards. This was what community was supposed to feel like. Over the next few months, life continued in its new normal. The HOA functioned smoothly under Deborah's leadership, focusing on legitimate community improvements rather than petty enforcement. People took pride in the neighborhood because they wanted to, not because they were afraid of fines. And everyone seemed genuinely happier. I ran into Margaret one more time in late summer. I was at a local coffee shop, and she was there with a young girl who I assumed was one of her literacy program students. They were reading together, and Margaret looked more at peace than I had ever seen her during her time as HOA president. She saw me and waved, and I waved back. We did not talk, but we did not need to. Everything that needed to be said had been said. She had moved on with her life, found something that made her happy, and let go of the need to control everything around her. It was a good ending for everyone involved. As fall approached again, marking a year and a half since the original incident, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. My life was so much better than it had been when I first moved to Pinewood Heights. I had real friends now, a community I cared about, and a sense of belonging that I had never experienced before. All because I had refused to be bullied over something as simple as a snow pile. The first snow of the season came in early November. I woke up to find about 8 inches of fresh powder covering everything, and I could not help but smile. I got my coffee, bundled up, and headed outside with my snowblower. As I cleared my driveway, I carefully piled the snow at the end, right next to the plaque that commemorated last year's pile. Tom came out and saw what I was doing. "Creating another historic monument," he called over. "Just clearing my driveway," I called back. "But if this pile wants to become legendary too, I would not complain." We both laughed, and Tom came over to help. As we worked together in the cold morning air, our breath making clouds in front of us, I thought about how perfect this moment was. Just 2 neighbors helping each other out. No drama, no conflict, no HOA president threatening to call the police. Just community and friendship and mutual support. That was what I had wanted when I bought my house in an HOA neighborhood. Not some perfectly manicured suburb, where everyone was afraid to step out of line, but a real community where people cared about each other and helped each other. And thanks to one dramatic confrontation over a snow pile, that was exactly what I had found. The snow pile grew to about 5 feet high this time, even bigger than the original. I stood back to admire our work, coffee in hand, and Tom raised his own travel mug in a mock toast. "To snow piles," he said. "To snow piles," I agreed. "And to standing up for what is right even when it seems silly." "Especially when it seems silly," Tom corrected. "Those are usually the most important times." He was right. Sometimes the most important battles are fought over the smallest things, because those small things represent bigger principles. My snow pile had represented my right to manage my own property without unreasonable interference. Margaret's reaction had represented the kind of petty tyranny that can take over when people are given power without accountability. And the resolution had represented what can happen when a community decides it has had enough and demands better. As I went inside to warm up, I looked back one more time at the snow pile and the plaque beside it. It was a ridiculous monument to a ridiculous situation, but it also served as a real reminder of an important lesson. Do not